The story begins in the year 1995, where we see a scene of four friends who have come to the mountains for hiking. Among them is a person named Paul. The place they visit is quite ancient, and they notice some tribal markings and an old temple that catches their interest. As they ascend to the mountain's peak, Paul begins to hear a strange sound that none of the others can hear. Drawn to the sound, Paul moves forward and suddenly falls into a deep pit. Shocked by this, his friends rush to help him. One of his friends lowers himself into the pit using a rope and discovers that it's actually a cave. There, he finds Paul sitting quietly, lost in some kind of trance, chanting something under his breath. In front of Paul lies a strange skeleton, much larger than an average human skeleton. Surrounding this giant skeleton are several smaller skeletons, all positioned as if bowing before the large one. Paul's friend, confused by the sight, approaches Paul. But Paul, still in his trance-like state, warns him, "Please don't come near me. If you touch me, all of you will die." Despite the warning, his friend cannot leave Paul alone in the cave and carries him out on his shoulder. As they venture further, they come across a wooden cabin where they decide to take shelter. 2 days pass, and snow begins to fall, making it impossible for them to leave the area. While Paul remains unresponsive, two friends head out to find food, leaving one friend to look after him. While keeping watch, this friend notices a musical instrument in Paul's hand and starts playing it out of curiosity. After some time, when she looks outside, she notices a strange black figure in the distance. Alarmed, she steps outside to investigate, but the shadowy figure begins moving toward her. Terrified, she rushes back inside and locks the door. Moments later, the figure reaches the cabin and starts knocking on the door. Though frightened, she waits until the knocking stops and the figure seemingly vanishes. When the two friends return, she tells them about the shadowy presence, but they dismiss it, saying there was no one outside. Despite their dismissal, she remains visibly shaken. That night, as everyone falls asleep, Paul suddenly wakes up and whispers something into the ear of the friend who stayed back with him. The next morning, when the group wakes up, they discover that Paul is missing. They open the door to find his footprints leading away from the cabin. Following the footprints, they find Paul sitting at the edge of a cliff, playing the same instrument. Angry and worried, one of his friends scolds him, saying, "Why did you leave without telling us? Do you have any idea how worried we were?" But Paul remains unresponsive, chanting the same mantra. Suddenly, the friend whom Paul whispered to the previous night loses control of herself. She turns violent, attacking the other two friends and killing them. Afterward, she fixes her gaze on Paul, who looks back at her with the same eerie calmness. At this point, things take an even darker turn. He recalls what Amanda's friend had said about the ritual to summon the empty man. Despite his hesitation, James blows into the empty bottle while thinking about the mysterious entity. At first, nothing happens, and he dismisses it as a foolish superstition. However, on his way back home, James begins to feel a strange unease, as if he is being watched. The next day, James starts hearing faint whispers in his house, but every time he looks around, there's no one there. He tries to brush it off as his imagination, but the whispers grow louder and more distinct as the day goes on. That night, he dreams of Amanda standing on the bridge, staring into the darkness, whispering, "He's here." On the second day, James catches fleeting glimpses of a shadowy figure in his peripheral vision. The figure seems to disappear the moment he tries to focus on it. He becomes increasingly paranoid, feeling like someone or something is following him. Desperate for answers, he revisits Amanda's home and looks for more clues. There, he finds an old journal belonging to Amanda, detailing her fascination with the empty man. She had written about her experiences with the entity, how she first encountered it, and how it gradually began to take control of her thoughts and actions. The journal reveals that the empty man doesn't just exist in the physical world. It thrives on people's thoughts and fears, feeding on their vulnerabilities until it completely consumes them. Amanda's final journal entry reads, "I can't resist him anymore. He is everywhere. He is inside me. Soon, I will belong to him. On the third day, James finds himself unable to sleep. The whispers have turned into loud, disembodied voices, and the shadowy figure now appears in full view, standing in the corners of his home, watching him. In his desperation, he reaches out to Amanda's mother, who reveals that Amanda was deeply involved with a cult-like group that worshipped the empty man. They believed that by summoning him, they could gain power or have their deepest desires fulfilled, but it always came at a terrible cost. James then decides to visit the bridge again, determined to end the curse. As he arrives at the bridge at night, he hears Amanda's voice calling out to him, even though he knows she's not there. Suddenly, the shadowy figure, the empty man, appears before him, towering and menacing. James tries to resist the overwhelming fear, but the entity begins to speak directly into his mind, exploiting his grief over his wife and son. The empty man offers him a deal. If James accepts him, he can reunite with his family, but it will come at the cost of his own identity and soul. Struggling between his longing for his family and his sense of reality, James realizes that the entity feeds on his despair and decides to resist. He smashes the bottle he had used for the ritual and throws it into the river below. As the empty man begins to fade, James feels a strange relief, but he knows the battle is far from over. The movie ends with James walking away from the bridge, determined to uncover the true origins of the empty man and the cult that worships him, knowing that others could fall victim to the same horrifying fate. Video shocks James as he realizes that the group has been experimenting with summoning and channeling the empty man into people. The footage shows how the possessed individual begins to exhibit strange behaviors, muttering incomprehensible phrases and showing immense physical strength. As the experiment continues, the subject's body contorts unnaturally, and the researchers appear both fascinated and terrified. James is horrified by what he sees and decides to search the cabin further. He discovers another room filled with photographs and documents of people who had been part of similar experiments. Among these, he finds Amanda's picture, along with details of her initiation. The documents suggest that Amanda had volunteered to be a vessel for the empty man, believing it would give her power and purpose. However, James also finds a cryptic note indicating that Amanda may have changed her mind and tried to escape the organization. Determined to find her, James leaves the cabin and ventures deeper into the forest, following faint trails and symbols carved into trees. As night falls, he begins hearing whispers again, much louder and more insistent than before. The voices seem to taunt him, bringing up memories of his wife and son, blaming him for their deaths. James struggles to maintain his focus, knowing the empty man is trying to break his will. Eventually, James stumbles upon an abandoned facility hidden in the woods. Inside, he finds a large ritual chamber with strange symbols drawn on the walls and floors. At the center of the room, Amanda is lying unconscious, surrounded by a group of cult members who are chanting in unison. The head of the institute is leading the ritual, and James realizes they are attempting to permanently summon the empty man into Amanda's body. James tries to stop them, but he is quickly overpowered and restrained. The cult leader reveals that James was brought into this situation for a reason. According to their belief, James's grief and vulnerability make him the perfect catalyst for the empty man's arrival. The leader claims that James has unknowingly been part of the ritual all along, as every step he took, finding the bottle, searching for Amanda, and entering the forest, was orchestrated to bring him here. As the ritual reaches its climax, the room begins to shake, and a shadowy figure emerges from the darkness. The empty man looms over the cult members, its presence suffocating and terrifying. Amanda suddenly awakens, but her eyes are glazed, and she begins speaking in a voice that is not her own. The cult leader declares the ritual a success, but Amanda, now partially possessed, begins attacking the cult members. In the chaos, James manages to free himself and tries to reach Amanda, pleading with her to fight the possession. For a brief moment, Amanda regains control and tells James to destroy the ritual symbols to weaken the empty man's hold. James frantically smashes the symbols and sets fire to the ritual chamber. The empty man lets out a deafening roar as the flames collapses behind them. Once outside, Amanda regains full consciousness, but is visibly shaken. She thanks James for saving her, but warns him that the empty man is still out there, lurking in the minds of those who believe in him. The movie ends with James and Amanda walking away from the forest, knowing that their battle with the empty man may not be truly over. In the final shot, the camera pans back to the burned ruins of the facility, where faint whispers can still be heard, hinting that the empty man's influence remains. James had been in the cabin for a long time, and it was now night. Suddenly, he heard strange noises coming from outside. When he stepped out, he saw a group of people gathered around a massive fire, chanting strange incantations. James observed them carefully, trying to make sense of what they were doing. To his shock, the fire suddenly grew larger, reaching high into the sky. This terrifying sight made James panic, but before he could act, the group noticed him. They began moving toward him with hostile intent. Fearing for his life, James ran to his car and escaped. He drove straight to the police station and reported everything he had seen about the cult and their connection to the empty man. However, the police refused to believe him, dismissing his claims as delusional. Frustrated and desperate, James decided to visit Amanda's mother. He told her everything, that Amanda had become part of a dangerous cult that worshipped the empty man and that they were willing to kill in his name. He warned her that her life might also be in danger. Just as James was explaining this, he received a strange phone call. When he answered, there was no voice on the other end, just a piercing whistle that sent chills down his spine before the line went dead. James, concerned for Amanda's mother's safety, suggested taking her to a secure location. Although they had never confessed their feelings, there was a deep connection between James and Amanda's mother. They had loved each other, but had never acted on it. He took her to a hotel, assuring her that she would be safe there. That night, James woke up suddenly, disturbed by a feeling of unease. In the dim light, he saw a shadowy figure approaching him. Alarmed, he tried to attack it, but the figure vanished into thin air, leaving James shaken and sleepless for the rest of the night. The next morning, James returned to the institute, where he saw the same boy who had earlier directed him to the forest. The boy was with a group of people, and James decided to follow them. They led him to a hospital. Curious, James slipped inside after them and was shocked to see the group bowing before a man lying motionless in a hospital bed. The man appeared to be in a coma, completely unresponsive. Confused by what he had witnessed, James confronted the boy outside the hospital and demanded answers. The boy confessed that he had been instructed by his group to send James to the forest as part of a larger plan. When James asked about the comatose man, the boy explained that the cult believed the empty man communicated with them through this man, who had been in a coma for many years. Still unable to make sense of everything, James returned to the institute to investigate further. While searching through files, he came across one marked File Number 14, which was separated from the others. When James opened it, he was shocked to find that the file was about him. It contained detailed information about his family, his personal life, and even a copy of a restaurant coupon he had used 3 days earlier for his birthday dinner. There were also photographs of James that he didn't remember anyone taking. Terrified and confused, James returned to the hospital. This time, he went straight to the comatose man's room and found Amanda there, caring for him. Startled, James asked Amanda who the man was. Amanda explained that the empty man chooses a human vessel every 500 years to communicate with his followers. This man had been chosen 23 years ago and had been in a coma ever since, acting as a conduit for the empty man's will. James was stunned. He couldn't understand why the cult had information about him or why he seemed to be so deeply entangled in their plans. He pressed Amanda for answers, but her expression revealed she was conflicted. As the scene unfolded, James began to realize that there was far more to the cult and his connection to it than he had initially understood. The mysterious link between him, Amanda, and the empty man was only beginning to unravel. 23 years ago, the empty man possessed Paul and took complete control over him, making him the vessel through which the cult communicated with the empty man. Amanda explains to James that Paul's body has now become too weak to sustain the empty man, which is why the cult is searching for a new host, a fresh body to carry the empty man and continue his communication with the followers, fulfilling their desires and granting their wishes. To James's horror, Amanda reveals that the cult has chosen him as the new host. She further reveals a shocking truth. The memories James has of his life, his relationships, and his past are all fabricated. None of it is real. It was all created and implanted in his mind by the cult for the sole purpose of making him the perfect vessel for the empty man. Amanda explains that for the empty man's host, certain emotions are crucial: fear, shame, and emotional vulnerability. These feelings make the host an ideal tool, which they call a tulpa, for the empty man. James realizes that even his connection to Amanda's mother, including the supposed love they shared, was an illusion. That's why Amanda's mother denied knowing him earlier, because she never actually did. Everything James believed about his life was a carefully constructed lie designed by the cult to mold him into the ideal host. Hearing this, James becomes overwhelmed with despair as his mind flashes back to the moment, 23 years ago, when Paul sat before the eerie skeleton in the cave, the very moment when the empty man first chose Paul as his vessel. Suddenly, the empty man begins to take over James's body. The possession happens swiftly, and James loses control of himself as the empty man completely merges with him. James collapses, unconscious. When he regains consciousness, he finds himself back at his home, now fully aware that he is no longer just a human. He is the new tulpa, the new host of the empty man. He realizes that his body and his memories are nothing more than a construct created by the cult to serve their deity. The emotions of fear, shame, and regret were carefully implanted in him to prepare him for this transformation. He understands now that everything he thought was real was a lie. Accepting his new reality, James visits the hospital where Paul's comatose body lies. With a sense of duty, James shoots Paul, ending his life and severing the empty man's connection to his old host. As Paul dies, the cult members in the hospital bow before James, acknowledging him as the new vessel of the empty man. James is now the center of their worship, the tool through which they communicate with their God. But James's transformation isn't just about serving the cult. The empty man uses James to identify and eliminate anyone who doubts or fears him. James becomes a relentless force, carrying out the will of the empty man and killing those who do not believe. The cult's vision for James is fulfilled. They created his character in their minds, meditated on it, and brought him into existence to serve as the ultimate tool for the empty man. As James becomes stronger, he also understands that this cycle will continue. When his body eventually becomes too weak, just like Paul's, the cult will create another tulpa. They will craft another false life, implant memories and emotions, and bring forth a new host for the empty man. The cycle of creation, possession, and destruction will repeat endlessly, ensuring the empty man's reign continues forever. They will create a new vessel for communication with the empty man, and this entire process will continue endlessly, year after year, or perhaps for eternity. And with this, the story comes to an end. Make sure to subscribe to Film Reveal Decoder and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. If you have a favorite movie you'd like us to explain next, type "next" in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.